Hey everybody, welcome to another CS0 Intro to Java Programming video. This is the last video in this unit on objects and using objects. In this video I'm going to demonstrate how to use timers along with sliders, and it's going to draw a bunch of flashing lights on your application. Now I'm going to give you a fair warning that there are going to be rapidly flashing colors here. So, if seizures are a concern, maybe not look at this one. When I run it, the application is going to show up. Oops, that's the wrong one. It would help if I ran the right one. Run flashing lights. And you're going to see that I've got a series of circles which are going to draw different colors based on ticks of a timer, and the background is also going to change based on the ticks of the timer. I can slow that timer down, or in other words, give a bigger gap in between ticks. Or I could give a smaller gap in between ticks, making it go faster. All right? This project is based off the standard GUI and drawing template that I've been using all along, so there should be nothing new here aside from using timers and sliders. Let's take a look at the class. Flashing lights extends JFrame, implements action listener and change listener. We saw change listener in the previous video. Here's my instance variables. I've got my draw panel and I've got a timer from class timer. And the timer is an object that is going to do a whole bunch of updates. And every time it updates, it's going to invoke the action performed method. Then I've got my JSlider, I've got my JText field for the gap field, and then I've got a int called time gap, and that int called time gap is going to be used to throttle that timer and set it, to a higher value or a lower value to speed it up or slow it down. And then I've got something called secure random. We talked about randoms in a previous unit, and we used math.random. And I may have mentioned how math.random is not a very secure random number generator. In other words, you can, with some work and some good math, predict when certain values will occur. In other words, you can crack the randomness of that random generator. Now, here's the deal. Computers cannot create true randomness. They have some sort of algorithm that's going to scramble things up in order to generate a pseudo-random number. But some random number generators are just better than others and are harder to predict and harder to crack. Secure random is quite secure. In other words, it's very hard to predict when certain numbers are going to come up. It's very hard to crack. I'm not going to go into more depth on that. If you want to, it's a pretty interesting topic, and do a little research on your own. Anyways, secure random. We'll see how we'll use that object in this class. Main method does the usual things: instantiation, setting size, creating GUI, and setting visible. All normal things. I've got my create GUI, and we do all the usual stuff here. Instantiate my panel. And here is my slider. So we saw this before, but I've got some new arguments in here. You can set the orientation of the slider excuse me, to either horizontal or vertical. JSlider.horizontal is a static constant in the JSlider class that's going to tell the slider to be horizontal. Okay, then I've got my minimum value on the slider, the maximum value on the slider, and the starting point. So the lowest number on the slider is going to be 200, the highest number on the slider is 2000, and it's going to default when it starts at 1000, so close to the middle. I've got my text field. I'm setting the text on that to the value from my slider. So when I ran this, you saw that the text field immediately had a value in it. That's just the number that was set on the slider. And you can see when I update the slider, it's going to update that field. So that's just kind of like my output for what shows up on that slider. Then I'm going to instantiate my secure random object. So this secure random object called rand is going to be used to generate random ints. Then I'm going to add all these components, and then I'm going to register my time gap slider to my change listener, and then I have to call start on my timer. What start does is it activates my timer so that it starts keeping track of ticks from the processor, and it's going to update itself in a regular fashion. If I don't call on start, the timer never starts. Now here's what happens. Every time there's a tick on that timer, it's going to fire off an action event. And you know what action events do. They get sucked up by action performed. So every time there's a tick on this timer, once this starts, and you can see that as soon as I clicked play here and I ran it, the timer started going and immediately starts invoking to action performed and immediately starts, updating itself. So what happens in action performed is my drawing, like usual. I get my graphics, I'm calling on make random color, we'll look at that method in a minute, and then I'm filling a rect. Okay? Now, that's my, filling my background right there. And then here's where I'm filling my ovals. You might notice that these ovals are going to be groups of 4s. Well, I didn't want to draw all of them individually. I didn't want to have to draw all 16. I thought, why not make a method that's going to draw 4 ovals and then call that method 4 times? So that's exactly what I did. I made a method called draw 4 ovals. I pass in the graphics context. I pass in an offset for X and Y. And then it's going to do its thing. Let's look at that method, draw 4 ovals. Here's what it's doing. It's just calling on fill oval 4 times. And for each time, it's going to use that X and Y offset to offset where the initial X and Y is set. So what it does is if they're all set to 0, kind of like this, here X and Y offset are set to 0, that means all I'm doing is going to be drawing the first oval at 10 and 10. It'll be 80 and 80 high and wide. The next one will be at 10 and 100, and then 110, and then 100 and 100. So it's going to draw them in a 100 by 100 grid, and they'll all be 80 pixels wide, and they're kind of evenly spaced. So the first time around, when there's 0 set to those offsets, it's going to draw these upper ones right here. So at 10 and 10, 110, 10 and 100, and 100 and 100. So that's what the draw 4 ovals does. And each time I'm going to set a different offset. So the first one is going to be the X offset by 200. So the second set of 4 ovals is going to be the ones that are shifted over to the right in the top row. The next one's going to be the 200 offset, so it's going to be the bottom row, left side. And the last one is going to be an offset of 200 and 200, so it's going to be the lower right-hand corner set of 4. So that 200 and 200 offset one is right there. So you can see how I'm calling on that method draw 4 ovals. You've seen me start in this unit using methods more to clump together things that I want to use over and over and over again. This is something that's called method decomposition. I want you to be in the habit of anytime you have some sort of procedure that you know you're going to use multiple times, wrap it up in a method and call that method. So instead of having 4 calls to draw oval here and then here and then here and then here, all I have to do is call this method once and it'll automatically invoke those 4 fill oval methods. All right? Same with make random color. Make random color is a method that is going to generate a random color and return it. And this is where I'm using that secure random. So I've got 3 ints, R, G, and B, and I'm going to use those to generate my color. We saw this in the unit for smiley face. We did the same thing as we used math.random. This time we're using secure random. So secure random was that class in Java, and I created my variable called rand. And secure random has a method called nextInt, which will generate a random int based on some value passed into it. This is our multiplier. You remember when we did math.random? And then we gave it a multiplier. We multiplied the random call to that. Well, this does the same exact thing. So passing 256 into the nextInt parameter is just like doing the multiplier here. Okay? So that's how secure random is used. It's actually pretty darn simple. You first declare it, you instantiate it, and then you call the nextInt methods to it. So let's take a look at that again. I declare my secure random variable here as an instance variable, so it's right underneath the class header. That means I can use it anywhere within the class. I instantiate it right here. So now there is actually an object in that variable. And then I can call that next int method or next double anywhere I want in this class. And I'm just going to use it in the make random color method. So rand next int, rand next int, rand next int. It's going to generate an R, a G, and a B and pass those into the color constructor and return that color. Okay, this is really no different than the make random color method we did for smiley face. The only difference is we're not using math.random, we're using secure random instead. All right, take a look back at action performed again. So once again, this is updating with every single tick. Okay? Now, how do we speed up and slow down those ticks? Okay, so here's where the slider comes into play. If we look at this, the slider is going to, when I slide it to a higher number, give us a longer time gap. In other words, a longer time in between the ticks. If we shorten that number, we shorten the time gaps, making those updates happen quicker. So a smaller number is going to be a smaller time gap. A larger number is going to be a larger time gap. If it's got a larger time gap, that means it's going to be a longer time in between updates. All right, let's take a look at the state changed method. All right, so here what I'm doing is I'm going to get the value off the time gap slider, and it comes out as an int. Okay, well, if I want to pass that into set text in the jtext field gap field, set text requires that it comes out as a string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that int into a string. Okay, so I've got time gap slider, get value is going to, we saw in a previous video, get the int value off that time gap slider. So every time I update it, it's going to get that new value and then it's going to store it here in that gap field. So what you see is every time I move it a tick, it's going to update that field. Now, also every time I move it a tick, we're going to get the value off the time gap slider and store it in this variable called time gap. And what time gap is going to be used for is setting the delay on the timer. The delay on the timer talks about how long the delay is in between updates. In other words, how long of a gap there is between one update and another. So what I'm doing is I'm retrieving the value from that and passing it into the set delay. The higher the number, the longer the delay. The shorter the number, the shorter the delay. In other words, higher number, longer time in between updates, shorter number, less time in between updates. So every time I update the slider, state change gets invoked, and we're going to set the delay on timer new, and it's going to speed up and slow down the updates. All right. Let's take a look at that smiley class one more time so you can see how it works. And the smiley does a similar thing. We can make them bigger and smaller with the slider. We can increase the time delay, make it update slower, decrease the time delay, make it update faster. And the state changed method is going to update with every single tick of that move the slider, and the timer updates and calls on action performed, thereby drawing a smiley face with every tick of the timer. All right, so we've seen several videos that are each one of them talking about the basics of objects, using objects, making instance variables of primitive types, using those variables to retrieve data from those objects and store it, and then use that data in those variables to draw things to the screen. With all this information that you've gotten in the videos for this unit, you should be able to create this modified smiley project. Hopefully it's a relatively easy project because you've already done the hard work by making the smiley face project in the first place. All you got to do is just use that method, draw a smiley that you created before, and you're going to call it an action performed so that every time there's a tick of the timer, it's going to invoke a new smiley in a new location with a new color. Thanks for watching these videos and good luck.